Every village has its secrets whispered from generation to generation. In Hollow Brook, the rule was simple and everyone knew it by heart. Never fetch water at midnight. Children grew up hearing the warning, their parents reminding them whenever they passed the old stone well at the center of the square. Some said a demon lived in its depths waiting for the desperate and the foolish. Others claimed it was cursed, a gateway to something far older and darker than anyone could imagine. For most, it was just a story. A way to keep people indoors when the night grew long and the wind grew cold. But to me it became something far more real. It was Halloween night and my grandmother lay burning with fever. Her voice weak and trembling begged me for water. I remember staring at the empty pitcher, my heart sinking. The neighbors were asleep, the riverside too far. The well was the only choice. I knew the rule. I knew the stories. But love makes you braver or more foolish than you ever thought possible. And so I lit my lantern and stepped into the darkness. That was the night I learned why no one ever fetches water at midnight. The village of San Esteban had always been a quiet, almost timeless place, nestled deep in the mountains where the night stretched longer and darker than anywhere else. Elena had grown up with the whispers of its superstitions, the kind of rules that were never written down but lived in the marrow of every villager's bones. Chief among them was the one her grandmother repeated almost every evening. Never fetch water at midnight. That's when the devil walks with the thirsty. On this particular evening, Halloween night no less, the streets were eerily empty. Families had gathered inside, candles lit on their altars, prayers whispered under their breath. Outside, the old cobblestone paths looked abandoned, the wells standing silent like black mouths in the mist. Elena sat by her grandmother's bedside, the dim lantern casting shadows across the wrinkled face of the woman who had raised her. Her grandmother coughed, a deep rattling sound that sent fear into Elena's chest. "Water," the old woman rasped, her lips parched, her voice trembling with both weakness and urgency. Elena glanced at the clay jug by the door. Empty. She had forgotten to refill it earlier, distracted by tending to her grandmother's frail body. Panic gnawed at her. The only water source nearby was the communal well at the center of the village, a place shrouded in superstition after dark. Elena's mind raced with the stories she had heard as a child, figures in black habits with hollow eyes, laughter echoing in the night, and shadows that followed you even when you ran. She squeezed her grandmother's hand, torn between love and terror. The chime of the clock tower struck 11:30. Time was slipping fast. Elena knew she could not let her grandmother suffer. With trembling resolve, she wrapped herself in a shawl, lifted the lantern from its hook, and stepped into the misty night. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant howl of a dog. Her heart pounded as her grandmother's warning replayed in her mind. Never fetch water at midnight. But compassion outweighed fear. For Elena, love was stronger than superstition. At least that's what she thought as she took her first step into the haunted streets of San Esteban. The night was suffocatingly quiet as Elena tightened her shawl around her shoulders, clutching the lantern like it was her last protection against the darkness. Each flicker of its flame carved strange shapes on the walls of the shuttered houses. Their windows closed tight as if the villagers themselves were afraid to peek outside. Her sandals clicked softly against the cobblestones. The mist slithered around her ankles like pale fingers, curling and rising as though it wanted to drag her back. Every few steps she paused, glancing over her shoulder. The lane behind her stretched endlessly, swallowed by shadows. No one followed, and yet the air carried a presence, something unseen but breathing just beyond sight. She whispered to herself, "It's just the night. Just the night." But the words sounded hollow in the silence. From one corner she thought she heard laughter, faint, childlike, yet cruel. She froze, the hairs at the back of her neck prickling. When she swung the lantern in that direction, nothing but fog and old wooden doors stared back at her. She quickened her pace. Her grandmother's warning returned, louder this time. Never fetch water at midnight. It wasn't just a superstition, Elena realized. It was fear passed down through generations, fear that had kept the villagers alive. But tonight, she had no choice. As she neared the chapel that stood between her house and the well, the iron gates creaked open on their own. She knew the priest locked them at sundown, yet here they stood yawning into the night. Elena tried to walk faster, her pulse racing, when a sound stopped her cold. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, echoing her own, but coming from the opposite side of the street. She turned, lantern held high, eyes wide and searching. No one. Only mist, shifting unnaturally, as though it carried weight. Elena. The whisper slithered into her ear, cold as ice, unmistakably close. She spun around, her lantern trembling in her grasp. "Who's there?" she demanded, though her voice broke with fear. Silence. Her breaths came shallow now, her chest tight as the village square came into view. The well stood in the center like a black wound in the earth, its stone rim glistening with dew. Shadows seemed to dance around it, though no wind stirred. She wanted to run back to pretend she hadn't heard her grandmother's rasp for water, but her heart burned with guilt. Elena swallowed hard, forcing her feet forward. Then, just as she reached the edge of the square, the church bell tolled. Midnight. And with the final toll, the mist shifted. A tall figure emerged from its folds, draped in a black habit, its face pale and hollow-eyed, lips curling into something between a sneer and a smile. Elena's lantern dimmed. The rule had been broken. The village square lay cloaked in mist, silent and heavy as though time itself had frozen. Elena gripped her lantern tighter, her knuckles white as she stepped closer to the ancient stone well. The black-robed figure she had seen a moment ago was gone, swallowed by the fog or perhaps by her own fear. But the memory of its hollow eyes lingered, burning at the edges of her mind. The well's rim glistened under the weak flame of her lantern. Moss crept over its stones like veins, and the wooden bucket hung motionless on its rope, swaying faintly as though touched by an unseen hand. Elena knelt, her knees brushing the damp cobblestones, and reached for the handle. The iron was shockingly cold, stinging her skin, as if the well itself rejected her presence. She hesitated, her grandmother's voice echoing again. "Never fetch water at midnight." Her throat tightened. She whispered shakily, "I'm only doing this for her. Please." The words weren't a prayer. They were a plea to the night itself. She began to lower the bucket, the rope groaning as it descended into the abyss. The sound of the bucket scraping against the stone walls was deafening in the stillness, and when it finally splashed into water far below, the echo seemed endless. Relief washed over her. There was water, and she could still save her grandmother. But then, the rope tugged back. Elena froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Something was pulling the bucket down deeper, harder than the weight of water alone. She yanked at the rope, her breath coming fast. For a moment it gave way, the bucket rising, and then she heard it. Whispers, rising from the well. Countless voices, layered and overlapping, hissing her name. "Elena, Elena." The lantern flickered violently, throwing twisted shadows across the square. She stared into the darkness below, her pulse pounding in her ears when two pale hands suddenly grasped the rim of the well. Long, bony fingers with nails like talons scraped against the stone. Elena screamed, stumbling back, the rope slipping from her grasp. The bucket plunged, its splash echoing like a scream from the depths. Slowly, impossibly, a figure began to climb out. A nun's habit, black and dripping as though soaked in tar, clinging to a body too thin, too wrong. Its face rose last, framed by the hood, gray skin stretched tight, hollow sockets burning with a cold, unnatural light. Its lips peeled back, revealing a grin too wide, teeth jagged and glistening. Valak. The name formed in her mind before she could speak it. The demon her grandmother had warned her of, the one bound to the midnight well. Elena staggered backward, clutching her lantern, but the flame dimmed further, nearly extinguished. The demon's whisper seeped into her skull like poison. "You broke the rule. Now you belong to me." The square seemed to close in on her, the mist tightening, the shadows deepening. The well was no longer just a well, it was a gateway, and Valak had stepped through. The square no longer felt like the place Elena had known all her life. The cobblestones pulsed under her feet as if alive, and the mist swirled into shapes that looked like faces. Faces of the dead, staring with hollow eyes. The lantern's flame sputtered weakly, barely clinging to life. Before her, the figure from the well straightened to its full height. The black habit hung in tatters, yet it seemed to move with a will of its own, breathing like living flesh. Valak's face was inches from hers now, sunken, gray, its smile stretching impossibly wide. Every instinct in Elena screamed to run, but her legs betrayed her, trembling, frozen in place. "Elena!" The voice wasn't spoken aloud. It slithered directly into her thoughts, deep and guttural. "Your soul crossed into my hour. You are mine." Elena's chest heaved as she forced herself backward step by step. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I only came for water. For my grandmother." At the word grandmother, Valak's grin faltered. The demon tilted its head, eyes narrowing as though savoring her fear. Then with a guttural hiss it lunged forward. Elena turned and ran, her lantern bouncing wildly in her hand. The square stretched unnaturally long, the chapel's iron gate now impossibly far. Her breath tore from her lungs as shadows rushed around her, twisting into arms that clawed at her shawl. One ripped it clean off her shoulders, and the cold night bit into her skin. She stumbled, her knee scraping against the stone, but she pushed herself up, desperation driving her forward. Behind her came the sound, the scrape of talons against stone, steady and relentless like death itself pursuing her. "Elena." The voices hissed again, now multiplied, echoing from every corner. She ducked into a narrow alley, pressing her back against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. Her heart pounded so loud she feared it would give her away. For a moment, silence. The mist lay still and the flame of her lantern steadied. Then the air grew heavy, thick, suffocating. The lantern's glass frosted over. Slowly she looked up. Valak stood at the mouth of the alley, blocking her only escape. Its head scraped the stone arch, bent at an unnatural angle, teeth glinting in the dim glow. Elena's grip tightened on the lantern. She wanted to scream, but instead she did the only thing her grandmother had ever taught her in times of fear: pray. Her lips moved, whispering the prayer for protection. The words were shaky, imperfect, but they burned in her chest. Valak snarled, the grin twisting into rage. The shadows recoiled for a moment, as if the prayer struck them like fire. But the demon did not vanish. Instead it laughed, a sound so inhuman it rattled the stones around her. "Pray all you want," the voice rasped. "It will not save you." And with that, Valak surged forward, the alley plunging into utter darkness. The alley collapsed into blackness as Valak surged forward, its hollow eyes glowing like embers. Elena staggered back until her spine pressed against the cold stone wall. The lantern in her hand flickered one last time and then died, leaving her in suffocating dark. For a moment she could hear nothing but the pounding of her own heartbeat. Then breathing. Not her own. Ragged, guttural, hot against her face. The demon was so close she could smell it, a stench of rot and burned incense. "Elena," the whisper stretched, venomous. "Your soul is mine. Your blood will feed the well." Her knees buckled and she nearly collapsed, but a single thought pierced through her terror. Her grandmother, frail and thirsty, waiting helplessly back home. If Elena gave in, she would die here, and her grandmother would be left alone. That thought ignited something in her, something stronger than fear. With trembling hands, she reached into her shawl pocket and pulled out the wooden rosary her grandmother had given her years ago. Its beads were worn smooth from decades of use. She clutched it tight to her chest. Valak hissed, recoiling slightly, its grin twisting into fury. Shadows writhed, the alley walls trembling as though the village itself were alive. Elena forced her shaking voice to rise into the darkness. "Our Father who art in heaven." The words came broken at first, cracked with fear, but with each line her voice grew stronger. The rosary felt warm in her palm, as if answering her plea. Valak screeched, a sound that split the night, clawing at her with invisible hands. Cuts opened across her arms, her dress tore, but still she prayed louder. "Hallowed be thy name." The ground shook. The mist shrieked like living things. The demon's face contorted, twisting from mockery to rage, its fanged mouth opening impossibly wide. It lunged, talons outstretched. "Deliver us from evil." The final words erupted from Elena's chest, fierce and unbroken. The rosary burst with a radiant glow, flooding the alley with blinding light. Valak shrieked, its form unraveling like smoke in a storm. The mist scattered, the shadows screamed and dissolved, and for the first time that night silence fell. Elena collapsed to her knees, gasping, her body trembling with exhaustion. The lantern at her feet flickered back to life, its warm glow soft and steady. She had survived. With aching limbs, she staggered to the well. The rope once pulled by darkness now hung still. She lowered the bucket, filled it with water, and pulled it up. Her reflection trembled on the surface. pale, wide-eyed, but alive. By the time she returned home, dawn's first light was breaking over the mountains. Her grandmother drank deeply, whispering a blessing with what little strength she had. Elena sat beside her, clutching the rosary, tears streaming down her face. Yet as the sun rose higher, Elena swore she heard something faint in the distance. From the well, carried on the morning wind, came a whisper. Elena, the rule was never meant to scare, it was meant to protect. And she had learned too late. Some doors, once opened, never closed completely.